Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is the Bride of Monster Kid Radio, and the song that you're hearing right now is called Dead or Alive. It's from the band Los Kosmos. It's from their self-titled album, which you can pick up at loskosmos.bandcamp.com. Cosmos is spelled with a K, or just follow the link in the show notes over at monsterkidradio.net. That's our website. And by the way, my name is Derek M. Cook, the writer, producer, and host of this show. Welcome to week 4 and the final week of Full Moon June here on the show. We've been doing nothing but werewolf movies this month, talking about our favorite furry monsters here on the show with some of our favorite people. It's been a real blast. It's been a lot of fun, and this week's conversation is a lot of fun for me too, because we are welcoming back to the show Monster Kid Radio irregular, fellow podcaster, fellow Lovecraftian, fellow Howard head, David Heath. He is going to be on the show this week, and he's joining Beth and I as we break down the birth of the shared cinematic universe that we call the Universal Monster Movies. We're talking about Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, featuring Lon Chaney Jr., Bela Lugosi, and a cast that's just phenomenal. It's a fun conversation. I'm having a great time diving into these werewolf movies, and I appreciate y'all indulging me and letting me get my werewolf on while we talk about these types of movies this month here on the show. I wanted to give a special shout out to friend of the show, person who actually kicked off Werewolf Month with us here. That'd be Mark Finn. The reason I want to give Mark Finn a shout out is because he was just honored at the most recent Howard Days celebration. He was inducted into the Black Circle. The Black Circle Award is basically the Lifetime Achievement Award when it comes to Robert E. Howard Days. Mark, congratulations from all of us here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio. Listeners, you can check out his thoughts on being inducted into the Black Circle over at his website at NorthTexasApocalypseBunker.com. Well deserved, Mark. Well deserved. Okay, what do we got coming up this week? Well, we've got David and Beth, but we have a returning Mark Matzke with the Beta Capsule review, talking about Ultraman Ace. He's been reviewing every episode of Ultraman, and we are still in the thick of things with Ultraman Ace. And it's a return to form for Mark. He had to take the week off last week, and we totally understand. I'm glad that he's back. Mark, you are welcome back anytime, and anytime, and anytime you need a break, I totally get it too. Also, speaking of returning segments, we have been honored to have Kenny from Old Mexico kicking in with his look at famous monsters of Filmland. We've got another installment from Kenny this week here on the show. I am looking forward to all of this, so why don't we just kind of stop with the jibber jabber and get on with the rest of the show right now.
I was a teenage werewolf, the most terrifying picture of our time. I was a teenage werewolf, fantastic, bewildering, a motion picture to stand beside the greatest horror stories of all time. I was a teenage werewolf.
See the top double thrill, double chill motion picture program of the year.
Curse of the Werewolf, in color. The harrowing story of the legendary half-man, half-wolf.
His evil beast blood demanded he kill.
Plus, The Shadow of the Cat, a shocking adventure into murder and psychotic fear.
2 terrifying hits together. Don't miss them.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 44, sets up a scary story, Sparkling Beans. Demons out, Fortune in. That's the sentiment at the heart of the Setsubun bean scattering custom, which Hokuto celebrates with a classroom full of children. However, a thunderstorm rattles the kids, and Hokuto's friend Ichiro eats a strange red bean, which immediately starts sapping his strength. Meanwhile, Tak is admiring their new weapon, the Golden Hawk, when Hokuto shows up with a bag of beans. Kono, in particular, is enthused to observe the Setsubun custom, and he too finds a red bean, which he promptly eats. Their revelry is interrupted by the appearance of a terrible monster, but Kono is stunned to discover he can barely lift his own helmet. Hokuto, having consumed a red bean himself, can barely fly his Tak jet. Ejecting from the vehicle, he transforms into Ace, only to learn that the Ultra Brother is likewise weakened, and is unable to defeat terrible monster Oni Devil. When Hokuto and Kono end up at the same hospital as his friend Ichiro, they push each other to regain strength, but their efforts are futile, until Hokuto receives a message from none other than Ultra 7. Premiering February 2nd, 1973, episode 44 of Ultraman Ace highlights the Setsubun rituals that mark the changing seasons, in particular the day before spring, on the traditional Japanese calendar. While Captain Ryu rather poignantly says, "I hope we never lose Japan's ancient customs no matter how much the world changes," the bean-eating custom itself becomes a source of danger, as an unidentified enemy, presumably working in concert with terrible monster Oni Devil, poisons the beans meant to convey good health. The special effects are magnificent in this episode, between atmospheric nighttime battles, detailed miniatures and forced perspective shots aplenty, a terrible monster rooted in ancient Japanese lore, and the most fully realized vision of Nebula M78 to date. I sincerely hope you will have the good fortune to see this Setsubun scary story. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, yearning for love and discovering on the eve of her marriage the monstrous inheritance that was her birthright of fear.
Oh, I still shudder when I recall that face, like some perverted mask of evil out of a legend of horror.
Then you saw him, Miss Hyde?
Once, at the very last, just before the mob caught him. They almost tore him to pieces. The villagers broke into this tomb and drove a stake through his heart.
Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, terrified that she become the disfigured thing that was her father, a vampire drawing sustenance from bestiality.
I've got to get a stake and drive it through my heart and bury me beside my father. Well, do it! Do I have to kill myself? If you love me, please kill me!
In a forgotten mansion deep in a dismal swampland, a scientist, crazed by his lust for revenge, repairs the last detail of a diabolical death plan.
A while ago, Plato was a man, a harmless, good-natured man. Look at him now, he's no longer king. He's a wolf, snarling, ferocious, lusting for the kill.
The beast strikes swiftly, the first of 4 violent, fiendish murders. Into this crime-ribby situation, a reporter finds the biggest story of his career.
That's a made a gory enough story for your paper?
Lord, give the story to me. He was my friend.
Joined by the girl he loves, these two follow the gruesome trail of the mad monster. Every lead proves false. Then, one night, a strange, ominous power draws this girl to a rendezvous with death. The Mad Monster.
This week, we are concluding our history of werewolves and famous monsters with a look at the last 2 decades of the classic FM's original run. For the 70s, we return to Vincent Simonelli's article in FM 153. Here is what he had to say about werewolves in the disco decade. Jess Franco's 1970 venture, Dracula vs. Dr. Frankenstein, contained werewolfism. From Brazil came The Wolfman, 1971, in which a man accidentally causes his son to become a werewolf. 1971's Werewolf on Wheels stretched credibility to the limits when 2 members of a motorcycle gang were transformed into werewolves. Television got into the act with The Moon of the Wolf, based on the fine book of the same title. The Rats Are Coming, The Werewolves Are Here, released in 1972, told the story of a family of werewolves that raised killer rodents. Monsters Met Watergate in The Werewolf of Washington, in which a presidential press aide, and finally the president himself, are stricken with lycanthropy. 1973 seems to have been the year for werewolves. Also made that year was The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, in which a boy must combat his Wolfman father, and The Beast Must Die, which was a reworking of both The Most Dangerous Game and Then There Were None, with a werewolf thrown in for bad measure. This film included a 30-second werewolf break during which the audience was invited to guess who the werewolf really was. The last and one of the better werewolf films to come out in recent years was Tyburn Films' Legend of the Werewolf, from England, starring Peter Cushing with David Rentoul as the werewolf. It tells the story of an orphan raised by wolves who grows up to be a werewolf. None of the films mentioned received feature coverage in the pages of FM. The early 80s was another story. We already got a taste of the extensive coverage of American Werewolf in London in our first edition. Today, we will look at 2 additional werewolf flicks covered in the waning days of Forey's original run. In FM 176, we see this brief preview of a 1981 flick that played werewolves for laughs. Full Moon High, a werewolf film that's a comedy. Can you imagine a boyfriend with enough facial foliage to keep a barber's college in business? Breath so bad that even Blisterine couldn't cure it? And fleas? Tony, Adam Arkin, a high school football hero in the small town of Full Moon, accompanies his pop, CIA agent Ed McMahon, to Transylvania. There, Tony is nipped on the neck by one of the children of the night and turns into a you-know-what. When he comes to realize that he is a werewolf, he leaves town and spends the next 20 years being the bane of wolfophobes. In other words, he puts a bite per night on people. Tony doesn't age, and so 20 years later, when he gets homesick and goes back to the old alma mater, he passes as his own son and enrolls. Once again, he goes out for football. 2, fur, 6, 8, hike, Full Moon High. In FM 174, we have this look at another classic from the year of the werewolf, The Howling. Fans all have their favorite werewolf films. For some, the original Werewolf of London remains the best, with the late Henry Hole as the classic lycanthrope. For some, no Wolfman can touch Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. When color came to werewolf films with Curse of the Werewolf, yet another favorite was born with the colorful characterization of Oliver Reed. But man and boy, your editor has got to say, he never saw a werewolf transformation like that in the hair-raising last reel of The Howling. You can really believe you see a man turning to a wolfen before your popping eyes. 20 years ago, a young teenager named Joe Dante submitted to FM his selection of those horror picks which, in his youthful opinion, were the pits, prune pits, the bottom of the barrel, Z for zilch movies. In other words, Dante's Inferno, flicks that should have been consigned to the flames or thrown to the werewolves before they were made. 20 years later, he found himself directing Robbie the Robot and Forey the Acre Monster in cameo roles in Hollywood Boulevard, and cult queen Barbara Steele in the eminently successful Piranha. Now, Mighty Joe has helmed The Howling, which is overwhelming audiences with his eye-busting climax. As Scanners is to sci-fi, The Howling is to werewolf films. Joe Dante, the film's director, told FM, "I was attracted to the property, The Howling, by a couple of things. For one thing, it doesn't just imitate other horror movies. Imitation may be considered by many to be the sincerest form of flattery, but in horror movies it more often indicates a lack of imagination. Not so with The Howling. We did a lot of research into the ancient folklore of lycanthropy, and were surprised to learn how much of the information we automatically accept as fact is just the fiction of previous pictures, movie myths. As seldom used information was incorporated into the screenplay, the project began to acquire some important underpinnings. True legends are more frightening than made-up ones for movies. Don't get me wrong, I've always loved the way the movies handled werewolves, but the point is, we've already seen the old way. I thought it was time for something new." And with the assistance of screenplay writers John Sayles and Terrence Winkless, and with familiar faces like John Carradine, Kevin McCarthy, and Dick Miller, and Rick Baker as special makeup effects consultant, and David Allen on stop motion, and Doug Beswick on special mechanical effects, he got what he was after. Watch the telephone booth scene for a glimpse of famous fantastic film producer-director Roger Corman. And oh, yes, about Forey Ackerman's cameo. When you see a pair of nuns walking down Hollywood Boulevard and entering the Cherokee Bookshop, which is actually a well-known landmark that specializes in science fiction and fantasy material, watch out for your editor. Once inside the store, look for the poor man's Vincent Price, browsing. Pay particular attention when you see a close-up of a pair of hands, mine, laying down 5 tarot cards. In the top right-hand corner of each card is a letter of the alphabet. As the cards are laid out on the glass top of a case of rare books, they spell out sci-fi. Then the proprietor, played by Dick Miller, comes over, snatches the cards out of my hands, and gives me a curt reprimand about playing around with the cards if I don't intend to purchase them. To which I react with a "what sort of a way to treat a customer is that" look, and walk away disgustedly to the background of the store, where I check out some books on the shelves that I might need to add to the Acker Museum. Concentrate on my hands behind my back when I walk away from the camera, and you'll see a couple of copies of a magazine you might recognize.
That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Hey, horror fans, here comes the most terrifying motorcycle horror film ever made. Werewolves on Wheels is the ghoulish story of a wild motorcycle gang lost in the desert, mocking the supernatural. One by one they die. Unnatural, unbelievable deaths. See Werewolves on Wheels in color. The chiller thriller from the Fanfare Corporation. Rated R. It's a hair-raising experience.
It was a werewolf, I know it was.
A mother couldn't believe it.
Rich, stop this monster nonsense.
A father couldn't believe it.
Stop it, son. Killing isn't funny.
A sheriff couldn't believe it.
Doctor, that was no monster I killed out there. That was a man.
But your son cannot equate with your killing a man, so the man becomes a monster, and you, St. George, slaying the dragon. Devils, witches, werewolves have been with us throughout the ages. Children do actually see monsters.
A figment of a boy's imagination, or true?
We have a big problem with Richie. He's on that werewolf kick again. There's only 3 ways so you can kill a werewolf.
Oh?
By being stuck through the heart, or by being bashed through the head with something made of silver, or with Wolfman.
Here's the rest of it.
Something must have come down out of the hills. Puma, bear, wolves maybe. When we found it this morning, one of the victim's head was missing.
God, that's awful.
Give us this demon and let us exercise it.
It's true. Every word.
The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, rated PG.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Listeners, we are going to wrap up Full Moon June with a look at a bona fide classic, a movie that I think we've talked about on the podcast, if not in depth, at least briefly, because how can you not talk about Frankenstein meets the Wolfman? And I'm going to say it right now, the birth of the shared cinematic universe. This pits 2 of Universal's big bads against each other. It's got an all-star cast, an almost perfect cast, and I've got a perfect assembly of guests to talk about the movie this week. I've got my lovely wife, Beth, and I've got former Monster Kid Radio guest, current Bride of Monster Kid Radio guest, lifelong Monster Kid Radio irregular, David Heath. Welcome to the show, sir.
Who is also lovely.
I'll give him that. I do have the camera going. You guys can't see it, but yeah, quite lovely this morning. I'm inundated with loveliness here. It's been a heck of a month here on the show, talking about werewolf movies, kind of dancing all over the subgenre with An American Werewolf in London, Curse of the Werewolf, and finally getting to a Universal film, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943. Now, I love this movie, and I've talked about it repeatedly on the show, and I'm going to say it again at least twice in this episode. Let me knock one out of the way now. One of the best rise from the dead scenes I've ever seen in a film is in this movie. I know I've said it repeatedly. Beth, this was a first-time watch for you, right?
Yeah. Continuing my monster education.
That's right. Watched it yesterday and actually inadvertently broke it up because we watched part of it during my lunch break and then watched the rest of it after I got off work, which gave me an interesting perspective on this movie that I hadn't considered before. But we'll get into that. The reason we picked this movie is because David loves this one.
Yes, and the word love, again, the English language is failing me. I'm going to say is impactful on me. Because most people, anytime I'm on this show or other show, and I'm talking about an old movie, right now it's a drinking game. Oh, David is going to talk about when he was 11 or 12, and he watched this movie with his sister and or cousins. Take a drink. So again, and like most of 50s, 40s monster movies, I first saw this because I lived in the greater LA market, and Tom Hatton, he was a local person, but he did a lot of 30s science fiction stuff. And he had a show that he called the Family Film Festival, and he would run all these movies. And that's where I first saw this. And I was a precocious child. I didn't have the word. I didn't understand it. But my thought was, oh, they're just going to take the werewolf and they're going to take Frankenstein and throw them together. And I was just dumbfounded that there was a plot reason that the werewolf returned. and that he was looking for death. He was looking for a release. And I'm 11 years old. I don't have the words to explain. I don't know what a trope is. But I remember just sitting there, okay, this makes sense. And that was very impactful. It impacts on how I write, how I see other movies. And my perspective at the time is, Scooby-Doo is going to meet the Harlem Globetrotters for no reason. Oh, of course, the Addams family are going to be in that hotel. That's kind of my concept of throwing things together. And even though I didn't know what it meant, I didn't have the words, this made sense to me. And it just hooked me.
You mentioned the name Tom Hatton, and I'm thinking, I know that name. Why do I know that name? He did a voice in The Secret of NIMH, and I loved that movie growing up. He was the farmer in The Secret of NIMH.
And anyone in LA, he would do the Popeye, and he would do this, and he was I think he was the bad guy in Space Cadet, and he was one of the generals in Spies Like Us.
Oh, really?
He's one of the evil generals.
I think that was the first grown-up movie that I watched with one of my parents. And it was an interesting, odd experience. We went to the movie theater, and my parents went to go see Spies Like Us, and they expected me to take my little brother to see whatever Disney movie was being reshown. And I threw a fit because I didn't want to watch a cartoon because I was at that age. So my mom went with Kevin, my brother, to watch the Disney movie, and I sat in Spies Like Us with my dad.
I was going to say, please tell me you didn't see Spies Like Us with your mom.
No, it was with my dad, and it was, yeah.
My first adult movie with my parents was The Piano.
Oh,
we didn't know.
Again, listeners, I can see the looks on my guests' faces, and David's eyes got really wide. I'm covering my mouth like, oh no. Well,
since everybody's sharing, I think mine is probably Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, that's a cool one.
That's class right there. That's classy. That's
class.
Much better
Or
than
Airplane. I'm not sure which one came out first.
But I can see so going back to our movie, I can see what you're saying about in that era where you've got the dime movies, that the kids are all running downtown to see on Saturday, and, they're watching movie after movie, and plot was not always necessary. Or plot reasons for everything was not always necessary. And you're still in an era where you have studios with actors on retainer, so you're going to see big names in things just because they've got them and they want to sell tickets, and not necessarily because it makes the most sense to put them in there. So yeah, I agree. When all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there's actually like a reason for all this, and it's thought through, and that's fantastic.
I was particularly taken this time around watching this, that they did seem to take some care to make it all make sense. Because this is the era in which there is no video streaming, any of this stuff. It's not like nerds like me watched all the Frankenstein movies leading up to this and the Wolfman leading up to this to see it continue that same story. It had been years since, at least, I don't know how many years had passed since the last time we saw the monsters on the screen. I guess the Ghost of Frankenstein came out in 1942, but it'd been a while since we'd seen the Wolfman. So they could have played fast and loose with the plot and the continuity, but they tried to make it make sense. Kind of.
And they tried harder. And you may be talking about this, but it was supposed to be a much closer sequel to, is it The Ghost of Frankenstein?
Yeah, Ghost was the fourth film.
So in that movie, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it, Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, gets his brain put in Frankenstein. And they were going to keep that. But the dialogue was just, so many people had only seen the original Frankenstein and not the Ghost of Frankenstein. They were afraid people were going to say, why is he talking like Dracula?
Yeah.
And one of the things is that because of blood or something in the Ghost of Frankenstein, he goes blind with Igor's brain. They were originally going to do that in the story, but they yanked it and they don't explain it. That is why Frankenstein's hands and arms are out up front, because he can't see. But
Okay.
And this is where we get Frankenstein walking like Frankenstein.
Having those arms out is an invention of the screenwriter, the director, and Lugosi, which is interesting that such a trademark of Frankenstein's monster exists partly because of the actor that originally turned down the role back in the 30s.
So is that now? I mean, obviously, we know that your original actor is not available, so you have to go with someone else anyway. But is that partly why they went with Lugosi then? Because they were like, well, his brain's in there. I mean, it's kind of like I can see where stuff came together, but then it also just you got to do what works on the screen. And
my understanding is originally Lon Chaney Jr. was going to play both parts
because he played him in Ghost of Frankenstein. Yeah, Chaney played Frankenstein's monster in Ghost of Frankenstein. Beth, you were saying that Lugosi didn't really seem to fit the mold as well, and Chaney had the same issue. I love Chaney to death, but his Frankenstein's monster is probably my least favorite of all the different monsters he's portrayed.
Yeah, I'd have a hard time seeing him do that. And it wasn't even it didn't necessarily have, well, okay, this was not my favorite monster of the different monsters, but more of my issue was the matchup between him and Chaney, that they're so similarly sized that it didn't have the same impact.
Yeah.
And I even felt like towards the end when the monster's coming running into the village and they kind of tried to do some camera tricks to make him look bigger, but then when you cut back to him just fighting Chaney, then it's that it kind of destabilizes that giant monster myth a little bit.
Well, they had a stuntman too in place for Lugosi for some of the fight scenes, and still, Chaney is such a big, larger than life presence. He's a big dude,
and he's so active. Like the way he lopes around as the Wolfman is fantastic, and he's a very physical actor, and that against the very stiff Eastern European hold myself in check, even to the point where my hands are splayed coming out in weird,
There were a couple of times.
Absolutely.
In fact, I'm looking at the fingers going, does he have Ehlers-Danlos?
Well, there were a couple of times where he's gesturing with his hands, and I'm like, that's a Lugosi gesture. That's a Dracula gesture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of headcanon for this. Now, it doesn't explain why the monster looks like Lon Chaney Jr. in Ghost of Frankenstein. But if you go to 1935's The Raven, another Universal film starring Lugosi and Karloff, there's this idea that if you look ugly, you do ugly things. There's this kind of overriding theme that Lugosi is going to perform plastic surgery on Karloff's character to make him ugly and then manipulate him into doing ugly things, turning him into a kidnapper, murderer, whatever. And there's this thought that the ugly brain, the ugly outlook kind of makes you do these horrible things. So in my headcanon, putting Igor's brain, which is clearly an evil brain, into an innocent body makes that body do even uglier things and kind of makes him look a little bit like the original owner of the brain. I don't know. It needs a little bit of development, but that's my headcanon.
It's true. His character is no longer the friend from the second movie. Yeah.
The dialogue that was supposedly recorded and then removed, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to see it. There are a couple shots in here where you see the monster's mouth moving a couple of times and maybe he's speaking. But one thing that kind of really stood out to me this time is when they're recharging him, when Dr. Mannering is putting the plus to the plus instead of the minus to the minus or whatever he's doing. There's a close-up of Frankenstein monster's face and his eyes suddenly get very wide. Like suddenly he can now see. And I thought that was a cool little holdover from the whole he's blind. And we still got that moment. and it's, ghosty, so it's almost kind of a cliche to have a close-up of his eyes anyway. It was just really cool. I like that moment a lot.
Yeah. And I will admit, this movie is a hit and miss. There are 5 seconds that are perfection. And it's a throwaway scene. And it's the scene where Larry and the old Rome woman, they're riding on the wagon, and he takes the shawl or the blanket and he puts it on her shoulders. All of a sudden, despite being the monster, he still has some sort of humanity. And I wish they developed it more. It really was kind of a throwaway moment, but that is perfection to me.
Beth, you were commenting a few times on Maliva, Mariah.
I love Maliva. I love her little band. I love when we first re-encounter her and she's talking to Cheney and everything. And there's a guy in the background giving the best side eye of like, oh, you're getting eaten by the Wolfman. And it's just perfectly in the background going, you're nuts, And no, she's great. And, such an interesting woman to have come out of kind of the early Eastern Bloc and then been in movies here. And she's past as a dancer and all kinds of interesting stuff about her as a person. But I really like that she got more time, more feature here. We got to see her a little more and explore her a little more.
She really is a standout.
If I had to describe her performance in one word, I would say it was effortless. She just seems like she was that person.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
She came out of the Method School of Acting, trained under Stanislavski. And she's old world trained actress, work in Moscow, Warsaw, that sort of thing, before she came over to the States in the early 20s, I believe. But she's a method actress, and she really was that character for me. I don't think I've seen her in anything else. And if I have, well, she buried herself in that role too. But she's phenomenal. And it's kind of sad that this is the last time we see Maliva in any of these films.
Speaking of characters, I really enjoyed the policeman. I just really thought he was great. I thought he hit all his marks. I thought he was the quintessential policeman. He reminded me very much of Inspector Japp from Poe, like he was taking his job seriously. And when they realized that it's like, there's, what do you mean? A werewolf. He thinks he's a werewolf. Okay, well, we'll just go with that. He seems to just kind of take it in stride,
I want to comment on that actor, and you made that comment when we were watching it. Listeners, if you don't know, Beth has been introducing me to some of her favorite things. As much as I've been introducing her to monster movies, she's introduced me to the magic that is Poirot, and we're making our way through the entire Poirot series from the BBC, BBC, and it's amazing. And I'm loving it. I'm having a blast, and Inspector Japp is one of my favorite characters. This police officer, the police inspector, I guess, in this film, played by Dennis Hoey, did play Lestrade in several Sherlock Holmes films.
See, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the analog, I suppose, the Japp to Holmes. He looks
with the same director, I think. Didn't the director do a lot of the World War II setting Sherlock Holmes stories?
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes Faces Death is the one that comes to mind off the top of my head, and that was the same director. Yeah, Roy William Neill.
So the director's casting it, and he's like, oh, we need a policeman. I know a guy.
He's still under contract, right? Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it is that era where you see the same person, you see the same beat cop in 15 rom-coms in a row. And, you get that. It's like, hey, we got a guy. The uniform fits. We're putting him in the movie.
Yeah. Well, in the Sherlock Holmes films, we don't talk about them very much here on MKR or Bride of MKR because, they're not monster movies. They have some spooky elements to it.
Beg to disagree.
Some of them some connections. Rondo Hatton's in at least one, and Rondo, is always welcome here on the show. But Universal cranked those Sherlock Holmes movies out like mad. So, yeah, there was like some years where 2 or 3 were coming out a year.
In a lot of ways, especially, and it's another thing as a child, I remember sitting and I didn't have the words. I watched one of them, and Sherlock Holmes is chasing off this German bomber dropping off a spy with a gun. I go, I didn't have the words, but I go, wait a minute. Sherlock Holmes was before World War I, and it confused me. But my understanding, those movies were very important psychologically.
Yeah.
That, we've got the quintessential English hero that can fight off the Germans. At the same place, I thought this movie was made in the 50s. It was made in 1943. And it's a Europe that does not have the war. And maybe it's a different Europe. Maybe it's after the war. Maybe it's before the war. But it's an escapism where audiences could see a Europe that was not devastated by war when the real one was.
I wonder, other than The Invisible Agent, which I absolutely love, I can't think of any of the Universal monster movies that even reference World War II. Is that the only one?
Off the top of my head, I would say yes.
Okay, but even without the war, there are definitely characters, Mr. I'm gonna go blow up the dam. That dude's a Nazi. I don't know how else to say it.
I think you nailed it when we were watching, Beth.
I mean, look at the guy. He's the plump middle aristocrat, owns property, a bar, clearly. He's got the comb over, funny mustache, like blonde hair, racial attitudes that are problematic. He's a Nazi, man. And we're not supposed to like him.
You called it when we were watching the movie that when they arrest Maliva and take her away, you're like, yeah, we're in a small German town. We're never going to see her again.
It's a small German town in the 1940s. Sure. Maliva's getting on a train.
And despite, the U.S. is in the war, that might be the only way they could get that into a movie at that time.
Yeah.
It may be. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. That all said, I did appreciate that the mayor, who's played by the amazing Lionel Atwill, another guy who just kind of disappears in his role. For a while, I forgot that he was even in this movie, and then he turns up, and I'm like, he looks really familiar. Oh, right, he's in this too. He was amazing as the mayor, who's trying to keep control, and it's like, don't you dare blow up the dam, and I'll have you arrested for whatever it is. It's really great to see him in this too. We've got everybody but Karloff in here. We got Cheney, Lugosi, Atwell. It's wonderful.
Well,
what do you guys think of the Baroness?
The what?
The Baroness.
Oh, the Baroness. I mean, I thought she did a good job. She's not quite as haunting for me as, say, Dracula's daughter.
Oh, no.
But, I mean, I think she filled the part. I just don't know if she overfilled the screen the way that some of our female leads have.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes. And maybe it would have been different if it was written a little bit different, more different.
And I actually was thinking about that too, that, if it was, and to tie into something very current, Universal Dark Universe has opened now in Florida and California, or just Florida. At least one of the two. And I know a couple people have been through. And of course, in their plot line, it's Victoria Frankenstein, a descendant who is bringing everything back to life and recreating the monster world. And, I won't go beyond that, but they say that on their website. So that's not spoilers for anybody. But it just clearly wasn't possible in 1940s for the studio to go, okay, we're going to bring the daughter back and have her be the scientist. So we had to pull in a doctor, and to do that. I think it not only ties into would she be capable? Because clearly she knew about her father's research, and they're not saying she didn't understand it. I think it's made pretty clear she does. But it's almost like they want to retain that goodness of women that, like, the doctors succumbs to the ultimate power corrupts, or absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And we don't want to see a woman do that. We don't want to see a female corrupted in that way. So we need to have this other character do it for the monster or monsters, so that she can remain pure in a way.
I would agree with that. I didn't think that when I saw it, but I absolutely agree with it.
Whereas nowadays, it's not a big deal to have a female descendant be like, yeah, crank up the electricity, baby. Let's do this, you know?
Yeah. So Alona Massey is the actress, and she was also in The Invisible Agent, which, man, I want to revisit that now. I love that movie so much. But she did a lot as well. She even had her own TV show for a year or two. Definitely, charismatic, and I thought she did a fine job. But she is kind of overshadowed a little bit by Patrick Knowles as Dr. Frank Mannering, who was also in the previous Wolfman film as another character named Frank. What is it with Franks, I think, is what Beth said to me while we were watching it.
Well, I was just like, really? He's got me named Frank after like that? Seems weird, but okay.
But he's another person, another Universal contract player. He played Will Scarlet in The Adventures of Robin Hood, and I could see him as an excellent Scarlet.
Oh my gosh, yes, he did.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do think the relationship between he and the Baroness, Dr. Mannering and Baroness Frankenstein, I feel like they were trying to give us the start of a romance.
And yet at the end, they're like clutched together, but is it just because we didn't die in that horrible flood and demolition, and which was awesome, by the way? Like, is it just that we didn't die hug, or do they actually have a relationship? I feel like maybe some of that got cut too. It always, after you told me what they did to the old film, Derek, it kind of haunts my nightmares of like, what got burnt up or recorded over or whatever, because what was on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, we'll never see some of this stuff. I would give almost anything to see the original screen test of Lugosi as Frankenstein's monster in the 30s, or to hear Lugosi's voice in this film, or any of the other things that got cut. There were scenes that were at least set up for photo shoots or promotional material for this film, with Lon Chaney and Bela Lugosi in full makeup, having conversations, spending time together, developing a friendship even, that we see photos of from like publicity stills, but just aren't in the film.
I thought about it in the past, and for all the people who are like, if I had a time machine, I'd go back and do this or that, or stop this or that. First of all, you can't go back and stop wars. You're going to disrupt history and cause a paradox. So you can't do that nonsense. You got to just do like discrete stuff. And I've thought about it. One of the things I would love to do is go flip onto set of some of these old movies being filmed as an extra, or, whatever, and just watch the process and just watch them work and stuff, because they were really inventing movies at the time. And so it's such a cool thing to think about, that they were having to figure out, well, this didn't work, so let's try that. And all of the scenery, I think I said right from the very first scene with the grave robbers in this one, I was like, I hope we get more than one scene in here. And we did, because boy, somebody spent a lot of time on this sound stage, and it is a sound stage. It's they're using sound stages, the classic thing like they did back then, but you feel like you're still outside in a graveyard and trumping through the hills. And when the mob goes after them, they're climbing through bracken and stuff, to the point where you can almost see some of the actors kind of complaining a little bit. like do we really have to climb through this many trees? But they were still building how you make movies, and what a neat time to be alive, a neat thing to experience.
The sets are amazing. Even the for the time, that castle and dam, that sort of set and mat combination, it's amazing.
And the way it came down, I was really like, oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. The very beginning too, not just with the the crypt scene, which for my money is one of the best resurrection scenes. I told you I'd say it again.
Good jump scare.
Yeah. Oh, some good
Good
jump
jump
scares.
scare.
But with some of the other shots too, like at the hospital and all that, the cinematographer, George Robinson, really played with shadows and having things in both the foreground and background. It feels, even though it's a set, we know it's a set, it still feels full and lifelike. The only time that you're kind of taken out of it a little bit is when you're watching the movie during that scene that David mentioned earlier, the best 5 seconds of the film, and your wife leans over and says, "There's an awful lot of ponderosas for Eastern Europe, but otherwise, you're in."
I was saying that the blur in the background helps with that a little bit, but
That's an awful American-style suit that he's got in Eastern Europe.
That's true. At least it made sense in the first film to have the American suit because he spent time in America. So yeah, but yeah. That sequence, I didn't comment on it earlier too much, David. That bit where he puts the shawl over Maliva. That whole bit, that whole traveling montage, I feel like you get to see the real Lon Chaney Jr. shine through. He seems at peace almost in a way. He doesn't have the tension in the shoulders anymore. He feels comfortable. He feels natural. And that's the Lon Chaney Jr. that I've seen in the very few interviews I've seen him in, and in things that I've read about him. Yes, he had his partying ways and his demons later in his life and that sort of thing, but he just seemed like a natural, charismatic guy that was comfortable in his own skin at this point in his life.
But at this point, he really reminds me of like Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That he's comfortable with his body. He knows how he wants to move. He knows how to leap from places. He knows how to jump to the side, or he's very comfortable with the character. He knows the character, inside and out. He knows who this character should be. It is him, and that's a neat thing for an actor to have, that physicality and just that natural comfortableness in their body.
Yeah, and knows how it's going to look on film too.
Yes.
I said earlier that there's something I wanted to comment on having watched this in 2 parts. I feel like once Chaney gets to Varsaria, once Talbot gets to Varsaria, things just start kind of happening pretty quick, and they could have developed it a little bit more. I feel like there's a whole lot of care put into making this a Wolfman sequel, and maybe not nearly as much care into making it a Frankenstein sequel. And I don't know if it's because a lot of things were cut because of the language thing or what happened. But I feel like watching the first 15 minutes or so over my lunch break with Beth yesterday made me really love this movie. And then watching the remainder of it after I got off work made me wish there was so much more of this movie.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Absolutely. And I didn't break it up when I watched it for this, but that was kind of my thought. It's a hit and miss movie. Parts are just hits and parts are eh.
I mean, I still love the film.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts on the whole? Well, actually, before I say that, I'm going to put a trigger warning here for suicidal ideation if you don't want to listen to this part of the conversation. But I don't think we can avoid with this movie the fact that once he gets to Vazaria, he's suicidal. It may be for a good reason in his mind, but he is. And some of the characters clearly have a problem with that, even if they don't want him to continue murdering people,
And this may be influenced by the fact that I was so young when I watched it. The fact that he was this monster and that he would live forever and that he couldn't die. As a child, I didn't equate it with real world suicide. And that's partly because I was a child. And I absolutely, as you say it, I get that might be very devastating to a person in a real world situation where it happened. It will bring up terrible memories. I didn't think of that. And I tend to try to be very cautious of things like that. To me, because he had already died, and that it was like a ghost trying to turn to heaven. But you're absolutely right that that's definitely the way it could be perceived. But to me, I sort of thought of it. And again, as a child, I didn't have the words. that
Right,
he
and
was a
as a
ghost
child,
that wanted to pass
like
on, be a physical ghost.
yeah, as a child, once you're bit by a vampire, you're dead. I mean, you might be undead, but you're not alive anymore. So that's fine. But I found it interesting because he does keep saying at some point, at one hand he's like, I'm immortal, but I want to die, and then he goes, but I'm human. I'm just a human. Even while he's talking about how unhuman he is and that he's lost his humanity because he can't die, because and he's staring down the face of forever and being a forever murderer too, not just living forever. That's one thing, but being that constant murderer. And it's kind of like, okay, is this the price we pay for immortality?
Yeah. It's interesting because this is not the only classic monster movie or horror film to really work the idea of suicide, wanting to commit suicide into its plot. This came out in March. In August of 1943, Val Lewton's The Seventh Victim came out. And suicide is a very big part of that film as well. And we've talked about that here on the show with Ken Hite a couple years back. And it's a wonderful film. It's a really creepy, spooky movie. But there's cult stuff happening and suicide stuff happening in that as well. And I wonder, 43, so World War II's going, could that have had an impact on some of this? I know we didn't really have a diagnosis for PTSD until much later.
Maybe.
I mean,
I think subconsciously it could not have that. I don't know if they consciously thought of it, but that and sort of this global emotional depression between the wars, I mean, it had to influence it at some level.
Well, I think that whole struggle to retain your humanity, even while having to do monstrous things, that definitely has got to be in there somewhere.
Sure.
As much as people were sitting there going, well, yes, the Nazis are doing monstrous things, and maybe even some at the time were going, Stalin is doing monstrous things, if they were known. The U.S. was being asked, and Britain and the West was being asked to do some pretty monstrous things in order to end the war, and not just in Europe, but in Palestine and the Pacific and other places. So can we be monstrous but retain our humanity? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
The writer Kurt Siodmak, who is responsible for The Wolfman, responsible for so much of the werewolf lore that we know today, he was also the writer behind Donovan's Brain, which is a classic science fiction novel and movie, was Jewish. He was a German-American Jew. And so I do wonder, some of that kind of wove itself into all of his stuff. I don't know as much about Siodmak as I'd like. I think I read a biography of him, or maybe even an autobiography, when I was a much younger monster kid. I don't retain any of it. But I do wonder.
And the historical thing, and again, I should have looked the exact dates, that kind of caught me this is when the English decide that they're going to destroy the Germans' heavy water program by destroying a dam and plotting out labs. And I was wondering, was that in the papers at that time? Were the dam busters a common known story?
Was that Norway? Is that what I'm thinking?
One of the places, yes.
Yeah, where they like skied in to blow up the dams and stuff to delay their nuclear program, basically.
Yeah, and some other places where they, I guess there's more power, where they literally flew in wooden bombers, the mosquitoes, and blew them up. I should have sat down and looked at the times, but in a ways, it's kind of a rip from the headlines.
Yeah, I wonder when this would have had to be filmed versus when it came out. And of course, we know at that time that the U.S. Army is all up in the business of Hollywood, whenever they can be. Surprisingly, not just in war movies too, but in all kinds of things. It, like you said, for the public welfare and general feeling and everything, it gives people a way to see that destruction where they couldn't showcase footage of the actual attacks.
So I did look at times, and it looks like the dam I was thinking about was in 43. So it may have been more of a coincidence than anything else.
It's interesting, though, and I think...
Or was it?
Or was it? One of the things that I love about looking at older films, though, and it's this, not just monster movies and genre films, but just these movies in general. And this is something that I learned from somebody who was one of the high ups at First Line Films and Dorado Films when I was working with them years ago, is that these movies are kind of mini documentaries about what's going on in the world during the time in which they're being produced. So, yeah, there probably is some anti-Nazi, anti-German aggression stuff woven in here. Maybe the damn thing isn't coincidental. Who knows? It's really interesting to look at and consider these things, I love it.
Take it as an allegory, but you want to know about 1980s LA? Watch Repo Man.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I've never watched Repo Man.
Oh, we'll have to do that.
I'll put that on the list.
One other thought I had.
Yeah.
And why it should not have worked. And I think that it worked because they ignored it. Frankenstein is the ultimate science monster. I'm of the belief that Frankenstein, the book, was the first English language science fiction. Yeah, I get there's some other
Heck
stuff.
yes, you did.
And werewolves are the ultimate supernatural. The moon, the wolf, the nature, the old gods coming inside you. And I think they got around that by just ignoring it. There's science and magic in this world. Live with it. And we see that same take is going to be fallen, 40 years later in things like the X-Files, where it's a universe where magic and science compete and coexist.
I think on some levels just kind of knew that Frankenstein is the ultimate science fiction monster. Mm-hmm. And Mary Shelley, like Beth just said a second ago, heck yeah, she did. The grandmother of science fiction. Yes, there were others, but really she was, we're going to give her props here. She deserves it.
Because they don't, people that are like, H.G. Wells. I'm like, yeah. H.G.'s got his place, but my girl.
Yeah. Mary Shelley did no Mary Shelley, we wouldn't be here today where we're talking about these movies. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And then you're right. The Wolfman, while I did say a second ago that Siadmak kind of made up a lot of the lore for the films, we've had stories of men turning into wolves, men turning into animals for years, long before anybody decided to make a movie about them. There are old stories, and to have the two kind of clash here, I love that observation that I've never really thought to put brain cells to.
Sometimes I look at things so out of the box, I can't see boxes.
That's one of the things I love about having you on the show, though, man. That's why I like having so many different voices as part of the show. When we had you on the show to talk about Pigeons from Hell, that thriller episode, for example, that was partly because you and I are both huge Howard fans, so having the different takes, the different experiences with the movie. And speaking of experiences, the Festival of the New Wine, I was trying to explain to Beth last night while we were watching it, why the Festival of the New Wine is just so cool and important to me.
Oh, I'm so dressing up and singing. I'm in.
I really hope they still do it at Monster Bash, which is actually happening right now while we're recording. I hope that at some point the dude gets in Lederhausen and leads the group in a song of the Festival of the New Wine. He does the song part. We do the response to the call and response. And then at the end of it, somebody comes out and chases him off the stage. It's wonderful. It's so much fun. There is a video that I put up on YouTube years ago highlighting this. I'll see if I can find it and make it available in the show notes because I think people will enjoy watching it. And it's just something, as monster kids, we have our own call and response song. I love it. I don't know anything about the song. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it was written for the film or if it's something else, but I dig it, man.
You guys were saying if the Wolfman is kind of the ultimate old gods creature, and definitely the monster is the ultimate science-built creature, I think then that puts Dracula as sort of the spiritual creature evilly. But if you go with vampires come from Lilith or Judas, one of the two, then vampires would come from the spiritual world. And so I wonder where else other monsters fit in that sort of thing, of overlap, sort of a Venn diagram of where they're all
yeah.
coming in at. Obviously we got the creature and some things like the Invisible Man, there's science in there mostly.
Yeah.
But it's not pure, so he's going to be a little more in the middle and stuff. But yeah, that would be an interesting take some time to go through and see how they all line up.
The spiritual element.
We did alignments as a show one time and ranked our monsters, but kind of a Venn diagram of where they all come from.
The spiritual element makes a lot of sense for Dracula, considering some of the weaknesses that vampires traditionally have, the cross and silver and things like that. We do have that whole I'm marked with the sign of the beast moment in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but we never see it. And I wonder if that was something that just wasn't shot. They were going to go back and shoot and insert later or cut. Yeah. It would have been nice to see, but
I actually thought that was a weird thing for them to be like, why would he have a pentagram just because he got bit? Is the bite in the shape of a pentagram? That's very weird to me. That was from like it was added in just to make him sound more evil to me or something.
It's an add-in. It's a follow-up from the first film, because in the first film he looks at his palm and you have the pentagram appear on the palm just to him, so he kind of knows, that sort of thing.
Right,
but then I also wonder, having said it out loud,
like on his chest,
he opens up his shirt, and I wonder now that I said it out loud.
And he says, I got bit right here, and he points to his chest at one point.
Yeah, and if we don't see it, is it really there? Is it more fuel for the Doctor to think that he's just kind of crazy and making things up? I don't know. Now,
I did appreciate that his grave was covered in wolfsbane.
Nice touch, right?
Well, clearly that was what was holding him in, and then those idiots go in and go, let's just move this. Let's move the garlic off of the vampire's tomb. I'm sure nothing will happen.
Everybody in town knows about, in that town, knows about what happened to Talbot and how he was killed and all that. But nobody seems to stop to think maybe we shouldn't be here on a full moon night.
I know. There are a lot of I assume we're skipping time throughout it. I mean, obviously it takes time to get to it takes 1 month to get everywhere in this movie, apparently.
Right.
Well, they are in Germany in the 30s and 40s, so the trains are probably running on time.
And never estimate how greed makes people stupid.
Well, yeah.
True. I love this movie. I think of the Monster Rally movies, no, we don't have Dracula in it, but it's probably my second favorite of the Universal Monster Rallies. And the Monster Rally films, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
And that's my favorite.
That's my favorite as well. I love Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein so much. I really do. But this is right up there for me. I really enjoy this one. And like David said at the beginning of this is the start of the shared cinematic universe. Yes, we'd have things later with Godzilla and Marvel and all these others. And let's not forget about our beloved luchadors. But, this started the whole thing.
Yeah, and I'm excited with what they're going to be doing with Alien and Predator in the next couple of years.
Oh, I with what they've done recently, for me, Comanche culturally, having Prey do that and having it be so correct, not just the language, but having all the things about the hunting and everything. That's what I love in those movies, the attention to detail. And I felt like in our movie today, that same attention to detail was there, even if it didn't get always remarked upon, that they really, from the sets to the costumes to, even not having the monster talk, I think was the right decision. The attention to details there on this one.
It would have been nice because I always like hearing Lugosi, but I think you're right. For this film, it may have taken something away.
And I think, and I've seen this written, but I don't know how well documented, is that they thought everybody saw or at least was very familiar with Frankenstein. But even though it was just a year before, a lot of people missed the Ghost of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And that they would have to do a whole lot of explanation.
And there are some moments in this film where it does feel like, okay, here's an info dump. All right, and there's an info dump. Okay, and here's Cheney sounding very pained and anguished, telling us about something that happened in a previous film. And I understand you have to do that again. It's not like movie nerds are watching VHS tapes of this right before they go out to the theater. I get that. So,
yeah.
But you were talking about the AVP stuff, the Alien versus Predator stuff. Are you referring to some of the shots that have appeared in a recent Predator? Was it a trailer or a teaser or something?
That
All sorts of
where the wailing Utani symbol appears twice in the next Predator.
Yeah. So we're definitely not getting away from an Alien versus Predator universe. It's still real. It still happens. And I thought there was like an Independence Day alien head scene as well at some point. I don't know if those are just in jokes now at this point or what. So
yeah.
But I like the idea of shared universes. I like the idea of things all happening at the same time, whether it's, these movies, the Kevin Smith films, or Friday the 13th Part 9 telling us that, there's a Kandarian dagger in the Necronomicon in the Friday the 13th series. So,
yeah.
Well, and it makes me think, we have like this movie, and then now we get things like Werewolf by Midnight, and, all these great team up movies that I just, don't think are possible if you don't show that it works early on.
I would love to find a way to definitively link the other monsters to this main through line. Because, we can link the Wolfman, Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster pretty easily. We can throw the Invisible Man in there kind of because of that throwaway gag at the end of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still trying to find a definitive way to link the Mummy and Creature, the Gill Man, to the series. And I'm trying to figure it out. Like there's that one moment with a bat in a cave and Creature from the Black Lagoon. I'm going to pick it's Dracula, but what I love, there's a book called, Return of the Wolfman. It was a novel written several years ago. It goes for a crazy amount of money now on the collector's market. And it was written as an authorized sequel to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which was treated as an official sequel to all the other films. And it is the Wolfman coming back to then modern day, so it's like the 90s. And he's trying to find a way again to end his curse. And Dracula's involved, Frankenstein's involved. And there's a chapter where they kind of talk about the history of the world, basically, since Abbott and Costello Met Frankenstein. And there's a little throwaway line in there about how the two characters that Bud and Lou played were so traumatized by what happened in Abbott and Costello Met Frankenstein, they changed their names and went somewhere else. And then they ran into an invisible man. And they were so traumatized, they changed their names and went somewhere else. And then they ran into a mummy. And they were so traumatized. So they do this whole bit. And then there's even a throwaway bit about how a scientist went to the Amazon in the 50s about, to investigate rumors of a swamp creature, that sort of thing. So they're kind of sort of weaving it in. They did do 2 other sequels to that book that just aren't nearly as great. But that Return of the Wolfman book, if you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend it. It's such a great read. I'm a collector. I'm a comic book nerd. I love this stuff, and I want to find the links and the continuity between it all. And this one started it, and I think it started it really well for me.
Very much impacted me as a child.
I think I knew the story of this movie before I sat down to watch the movie the first time I watched it because of the Crestwood House books, I talk about here on the show. They basically spoiled all the movies because, again, back when those books were coming out, we didn't have them on VHS tapes. We didn't have access to them. Only way to learn about the monsters was to read their stories in books like the Crestwood House books or Famous Monsters of Filmland or anything like that. So I knew the story going into this, just like I knew the story going into almost all the Universal classics, but I still fell in love with it immediately. And I'm totally drawn to the Wolfman. And I think this is a great way to wrap up Full Moon June. What do you guys think? Is this a good one to go out on?
I think that'll do it. Yeah.
David, what are you up to these days, man? Where can we hear you on other podcasts and such?
We are the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, and we've changed our format a little bit. So we were doing a deep dive on some mythos topic and then a movie. And even I admit that it was fun, but it was just getting really obscure, like Clark Ashton Smith's cities. So we're now going to a short story written by the Mythos Circle, and a movie.
Nice.
Cool.
I hope that goes really well. I know we've, changed up some things this last 6 months or so, and it's really been great for us. So hopefully that continues to do really well for you.
Well, thank you.
That is the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. You and who's your co-host? Got to mention.
So it's D.B. Spitzer, and we have a third one.
Yeah.
And her name, she goes by Aunt Gore.
Aunt Gore.
Nice.
Excellent. So yeah, check them out at pgttcm.com or look for the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos wherever you download your favorite podcasts. David's been on the show before. DB's been on the show before. I don't think I know Aunt Gore, so I'm gonna have to get to know her and maybe ask her to be on the show at some point. Think she'd be good?
Her name comes. She's actually a rather famous Portland drag queen.
Oh, Beth has got a look on her face.
I wonder if I know her.
More than likely you do. More than likely you do.
Well, check out that show. And then before we started recording, David was telling me that he's actually going to be appearing at WasabiCon, which is Portland's anime, cosplay, and gaming convention. He's going to be doing a panel. The convention happens July 19th and 20th at the Hilton Portland downtown in Portland, Oregon. What day is your panel and what's the panel about?
It's going to be Saturday, I believe 2:30, and it is going to be Cyberpunk, the history of the dark future. So where the term comes from and some of the most famous works, and why for a while it was more popular in Japan than it was in the US.
Very cool. I'm fascinated by what we consider American fandoms and pop culture, what gets snatched up by the Japanese pop culture and fandom, and what becomes important over there, and the way things kind of diverge, like how Call of Cthulhu at one point, if not still is, the number one role-playing game over there versus D&D over here, that sort of thing.
I believe it still is, or at least the number one foreign
game. Which is just crazy to me. Like, how did that, what? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So spoiler in this case, because they could do things in anime that they couldn't do in special effects in the 80s. So in US in regular video. So that's why things like Akira and Ghost in the Shell and Appleseed just went wild over there and we get Lawnmower Man.
Ghost in the Shell, that's one with Scarlett Johansson, right?
Oh.
I cried.
Oh, man. Anything else coming up, David, you want to mention?
That's the big thing. So thank you very much.
It's been awesome connecting with you and having you back on the show. It's been too long since we've even chatted at all, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, I miss my Portland crew. I miss my Portland family.
Portland misses you guys.
Miss the Portland coffee.
Oh, definitely miss the Portland coffee. I know it's like 100 degrees like every day down here, but there's no excuse to burn the coffee. Come on.
Come one and all and sing a song. Parola, paroli. For life is short, but death is long. Parola, paroli. There be no music in the tune, so sing with joy and down with gloom. Tonight the new wine is in bloom. Faro, 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 tonight we toast our happy host. Faro, la, faro, for he's the man we love the most. Parola, paroli. His barrel-bellied dipper lip, for drinking wine he's well equipped, but where his chest it must have slipped. Faro, faro, faro. The wine tonight is nobly blessed, Follow la, follow me. Follow la, follow me. By such a lady and her guests, follow la, follow me. To them I toast, come drink with me, that may they ever happy be, and may they live eternally. Follow, 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 Lord. Come one and all and sing a song. Follow, la, follow me. For life is short, but death is long. Follow, la, follow me.
Quit that singing, will you? Eternally. I don't want to live eternally. Why did you say that to me? Get away from me. Get away. Go away, all of you. Let me alone. Get away.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for sticking around and hanging out with us to the very end of this episode of the show. I know that we have one more week in the month of June in which we could do another werewolf episode, but I think 4 episodes in a row is enough. Besides, next week we'll probably dip into a little bit of werewolf talk anyway, because next week is a potpourri free-for-all feedback special episode. I've got some feedback that I've been sitting on for a little while, and I would love to have you be part of the show next week. So please give us a call, leave us a voicemail, call us at 360-524-2484, or you can email us at monsterkidradio.net. You can email me a written email, or you can do what one person has already done, and that is record an audio recording of yourself, record an audio recording, you know what I mean, recording audio segment and then send it in by email. However you want to contribute to next week's feedback show, I'd love to have you. Beth and I are going to go through feedback next week and catch up on some things that have been going on as well here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio Central and Team Death Headquarters. So that's what's coming up next week. I want to thank everybody who participated in Full Moon June. Mark, Matt, Beth, David, and Beth again, and you in particular for listening to the show. And I'm just assuming that you're sharing posts and retweeting tweets and just letting everybody in your social media circle know about what we do here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio. I appreciate all of the support, even if it's just giving us a like or a thumbs up or whatever it is you do online to show your appreciation for your favorite podcasts. Thank you for doing that. It really helps motivate us to keep going. And we really, really want to keep going. So we've talked a little bit about upcoming things that are happening here in the Bride of Monster Kid Radio world. And one thing that we talked about a couple of times this month were the dueling horror conventions happening in Phoenix, Arizona. We had Mad Monster Party and Days of the Dead, and we hadn't decided where we were going to go, if we were going to be able to do both, if we could get press passes, perhaps. Well, I can tell you now, we will not be going to Mad Monster Party. They told us they just don't do press passes. So if you were coming to the Phoenix area and planning to meet up with us, just know that Mad Monster Party is not where we're going to be. That doesn't mean we're going to be at Days of the Dead. We'd like to go to Days of the Dead, but I'm still waiting to hear back about getting some sort of press pass for Beth and I to go. In fact, if you have any connections with the Days of the Dead convention, folks, let me know, and you know, maybe you can work something out and you can help get me into contact with the right people. That would be awesome. The other convention that's coming up here in a little bit, I believe it's happening in August, is Gathering of the Ghouls. This is a convention that's put on by the Terror Trader, which is an incredible horror retailer here in the Phoenix Valley in Arizona. Gathering of the Ghouls 2025 is happening in September, so that's happening down the line. And yes, we have applied for press passes for that as well. And again, if you have any connections with Gathering of the Ghouls, maybe let me know or put in a good word for me, huh? Because I'd love to get Beth out to this thing, and I'd love to meet you at an upcoming convention. If you know of any other upcoming events or conventions in the Arizona area, let me know. Reach out. Maybe we can arrange for us to go and cover it, maybe meet you there. If you are going to an event somewhere else in the world, we'd love to hear about it. Call in, email in, and we'll talk about it here on the show. And I'll do you one better. I'm going to give you an opportunity to contribute to the show the way that Mark does, the way that Kenny does, the way that Jeff has in the past, even the way Dr. Tom or Jerry has done. If you go to an event, record something from there and send it in. Or, just call the voicemail line and give us a phone report. Just keep in mind the voicemail line only lasts 3 minutes. So if you have more to say, you're going to have to call back. But don't worry, I got your back. I'm going to edit the emails and voicemails and everything so that it just sounds like one long recording. So if you need to call in from an event, we'd love to hear from you. Heck, if you're going to be at Mad Monster Party, just because we're not there doesn't mean it can't be covered here on the show if you're going to be there. Anyway, MonsterKidRadio.net is where you're going to find everything you need to know about Bride of Monster Kid Radio. You're going to find links to everything that we've talked about. There's going to be a way for you to keep up with people that have appeared here on the show. There's going to be links to the band that plays here on the show. And there's a link to our Amazon affiliate bucket or umbrella, whatever you want to call it. If you're going to shop on Amazon, please click on the Amazon affiliate button on our website first, because when you do that, it takes a penny or two out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and puts it into Bride of Monster Kid Radio's. Every little thing that you can do helps us out, including following us over on Patreon, patreon.com/monsterkidradio. You can follow us over there without actually becoming a paying patron. So please consider following us over there. The reason we want to do that is that we are going to eventually start kind of refining where we do a lot of our announcements and news releases. And I think patreon.com/monsterkidradio is going to be where we do the bulk of it for everybody. It'll be public posts, so you don't have to be a paying patron. Although, if you are a paying patron, that helps us out too. Bride of Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Bride of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death, our other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, the Team Death YouTube channel, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. All previous episodes of this podcast, as well as the original Monster Kid Radio podcast, are available at www.monsterkidradio.net. Please rate and review Bride of Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Dead or Alive is copyright 2018 Los Kosmos. You can find this on their album, Los Kosmos, at loskosmos.bandcamp.com, or you can find them on Facebook or YouTube. Just remember that Cosmos is spelled with a K. However you find them online, and maybe even if you pick up their album, let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Oh. Ciao.